an argument that they should be completely independent, so they're not swayed by a coach or, worried about their job and all that side of it. I mean, again, you think of historical things of the Chelsea doctor, Eva Carniero, who was under so much pressure, made the right decision, but then basically lost a job because of it.
Hi guys, welcome to another episode of the world famous podcast, Beating the Press. Do not adjust your screens. There are three of us here today. We've got a special today for you guys. We've got Marwan, who's a sports medicine doctor, currently with Leeds Rhinos. Previously, he's been with Burnley and he's worked in rugby clubs before as well. So he's highly qualified to sort of talk about a subject that's cropped up this season. Obviously, we've had a lot of injuries and sort of reduced rest period in between has caused clubs, our club in particular, a lot of injuries. There seems to be a lot of sort of muscle injuries. We're no experts. I mean, I did a year about 15 years ago. I started my degree, so I'm no expert when it comes to this. So we have got an expert. I'll just pass over to Chris to sort of we'll ask Marwan a few questions, and no doubt he'll educate us as we sort of go along. So over to you, Chris.
Doesn't it feel like we made it?
Yeah,
we've actually got a guest on.
I'm expecting. Where's the big microphone and all that stuff?
Oh, it's right here. It's right.
Oh, is it?
I don't think you can see it. I've got the setup, but yeah, no, it finally feels like we made it again. Thanks for coming on. I thought I'd wear the Liverpool top today.
Yeah, that's not a good start. That's a bad start.
Ty normally goes on about us wearing our Beating the Press, but I thought injuries
so Marwan,
more fitting.
Marwan, I'm sure you've subscribed and liked our videos, and you know this is the top we normally wear anyway. This is our sort of top. So we have a little joke that we never seem to wear the same top. So
well, that's what I mean. I'm going with the injury theme, and I just thought I'd break out the Liverpool top.
Yeah, I like that.
Just for today. Yeah, so I'd like to start on concussions. Obviously, they've just started the new concussion trials, substitute trials in the Premier League. I think it was from earlier this month. I think it was an Arsenal game. And basically what it is for those of you that don't know, the Premier League have allowed, and I think it's the women's game, they've allowed 2 additional substitutions on top of the original 3, just for concussive injuries or head injuries. My question, Marwan, is bearing in mind concussions is obviously not the newest issue, a la Peter Cech. Why do you think that it's happening now as opposed to in the past where there's Peter Cech, the one that comes to mind? Is it more of an advancement in medicine, would you say, or is it just like we're in like a health and safety era at the moment?
I think with football, so concussion is not new in sports. You see it in American football, in rugby league, in rugby union, and those sports, because there's a lot more head injuries, have had to do a lot quicker. So, the RFU has set kind of a really comprehensive concussion protocols years ago, and then other sports follow suit. I think because in football, it's not been as big because it's not normally a kind of a head contact sport. Although, sometimes the goalkeepers get a fair whack. It's not been as prevalent, and I think that's perhaps why it's not really had to be looked at as closely. But you're right, it has been happening, and as in the past 5 to 10 years, concussion in medicine and in sport has just become a lot bigger deal. And that's because we've understood a lot more about it. We've also understood what can happen when it goes wrong, when a player gets repeated concussions or even just one concussion. And a bit like if you looked at you compare it to cardiac stuff. So, heart, so, the Fabrice Muamba kind of incident, the things that were put in place before that happened were so good that, they obviously saved his life. But before that, like Mark Vivian Foe is another example of a player where things weren't where they should be, and he lost his life. So I think what happens in medicine and in sport is as things evolve, the sport evolves as well, and that some of these things become better run, more kind of a shining light on them. And I think sometimes through adversity, you get change. And I think in football, it's been a long time coming, to be fair, that this is something like this is needed, because, so just to give you an insight into kind of the world of a sports doctor. So a player takes a head injury, goes down, you have to kind of essentially go on and review the player and see, a snapshot view. You might have missed what's happened, but you'll have probably someone in your ear telling you if they hit their head, were they unconscious, and there are certain rules that we have, but you're having to make a decision there and then, and it's quite challenging. Whereas you compare that to, you go to your GP or you go to the emergency department, and they can take 10 minutes talking to you, examining you, sending you for scans and stuff. So you're having to make this kind of seconds of decision, and it's very difficult. You put on top of that the fact that the substitution element to it, suddenly there's a lot of pressure to get it right. And if you take someone off and that counts as substitution, you're going to get a whole load of coach pressure. So in rugby, they completely removed that whole element from it quite a few years ago. So that there's not even increased numbers of substitutions. If you think someone is possibly concussed and needs to be assessed, it's a free substitution. So even though this is good news, there's still more that can be done to take the pressure off of the medics who are having to make the decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. The incident with Raul Jimenez and David Luiz. Obviously, Jimenez went straight off. You had David Luiz. He didn't go off till after half time. I think he stayed on for about a further 10 minutes. With the new concussive substitutions in mind, do you how does that kind of play out? Is it a case of, like you just said, you assess a player on pitch? Is there any kind of video footage that you would maybe refer to? How would that go down? And ultimately, whose decision is it to take the player off? Is it the manager, or does the physio overrule it?
It's a good question. And it does vary in different sports, but they all operate differently. So generally, so there's generally multiple people looking at that. So from a medical point of view, so you'll have the run-on medic who will be probably a physio to begin with, but if it's a concussion, it would then be a doctor. And generally the doctors tend to manage concussion. So they'd be kind of with the player, kind of asking them questions, seeing if they're disorientated, if they're confused, depends if they're on the floor or not, doing an assessment, kind of medical assessment. And then there'll be another doctor reviewing the video footage and seeing, kind of playing it back. Because it reminds me of a time, and this is again in rugby because I do a lot of rugby work. It reminds me of a time when I was with the England rugby team. We were in Australia, and it was a semi-final of the World Cup, and the video replay broke 15 minutes before kickoff. So we had to do the game with no eyes other than the stadium camera. So it was a potential. And we had a concussion. So we had a player who took a head knock, and I had to assess him. And someone at home would have had a better view than I would have had, having to make the decision. And that's just not on. That shouldn't happen. So so essentially, what does happen now is there's a video, and then another doctor will look at that and then feed to the doctor who's with the player, to say to them, right, well, he's taken, they've slowed it down, they've rewound it, etc., and they give you a bit of context behind what actually happened. There is discussion, and this isn't happening in football, so I believe, but there is discussion about whether that doctor who reviews the video should be part of the team or completely independent. And there's an argument that they should be completely independent, so they're not swayed by a coach or worried about their job and all that side of it. I mean, again, you think of historical things of the Chelsea doctor, Eva Carniero, who was under so much pressure, made the right decision, but then basically lost a job because of it. So these things happen. And again, thinking back to rugby, there was a case of a doctor who was under pressure to do a blood substitution. So again, in rugby, if there's bleeding in the face, then that's a free interchange. And then because they were short of substitutions, it asked them to either, I think, make a cut in the mouth or put a blood capsule or something to kind of feign an injury and then use it for interchange. So whenever you make rules, they will be, taken to the extreme. And it's a difficult place to be as a doctor, because if you're young, inexperienced, you've got a really dominant coach, then you can succumb, so it takes a strong character. And ultimately you need to, as a medical person, you need to think, well, my duty of care is for this player, I need to look after their welfare. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that actually takes precedence over your own job. And so it is a difficult one, but the solution to it is having a really well integrated coaching and medical team. I've worked for coaches who've been really good. I've worked for coaches who've been really difficult. There's different kind of coaching. Ultimately, the atmosphere is dictated by the head, by the manager. They set the tone for how it all runs. So at Leeds Rhinos, for example, the head coach, so Richard Agar, I've got a really good relationship with him. And day one, he was very clear that all head concussion stuff, it's completely your bag and it's nothing to do with me. So if you think someone needs to come off, I don't even share radio with him. It's a complete independent decision. I don't have to tell him, or I know the coaching staff. I tell the fourth official. So we're really well protected. Whereas if you've got another coach who, I've worked for coaches who you take someone off, you think they're concussed, and they pull them to the side as I'm taking them in for a head injury assessment to say to the player, if you don't come back on again, you're not going to play the rest of the season.
Wow.
And stuff like that kind of, you really do, it is a big contrasting style of coaches. And I know that the FA have done loads of work with referees and with managers to try to kind of educate, and improve things.
Yeah, I don't think that. Sorry, Ty, were you gonna?
No, yeah, you go. I'll got a question.
Yeah, no, I'm just thinking of all the managers that are going to take the mick. Like you say, with any situation, there's always people that are there to take advantage of it. I can think of one, for example. You've already made your 3 substitutions, and you're going into penalties, and go down with a head injury, we'll get in our penalty taker, you know what I mean? So there's always those guys that are going to do that. Just moving on, you referred to it briefly, and I just had a chuckle in my mind. Football always seems to be following rugby, and it's very poignant, especially with the likes of VAR and stuff like that. And I've just read something earlier today. I think it was Salford Red Devils. I'm not too good on my rugby league. They recently started doing, I think it's some kind of a trial with a mouth guard, where there's like a microchip inside of the mouth guard to basically send signals on the concussion, the level of concussion, or something along those lines. Is that anything that you know about?
Yes, so we also did that at Leeds Rhinos.
All right.
Yeah, so I know it a lot, and I'm sure I could dig out a photo of what the mouth guard looks like and a chip in it. So yeah, I'm really aware. So what that is, it's really cool technology. There's essentially an accelerometer and a chip inside the bless you.
That's fine. It happens all the time. My little one goes fine, so it's fine.
There's a microprocessor and a chip inside the mouth guard, and what it does is it measures. So I'll just go back a step. So it uses similar technology to GPS technology. So in football, rugby, all the players, in the back of their shirt, there'll be a little small cutout, and they put a GPS unit.
Yeah.
And that can measure all sorts of things, like how far they've run, the accelerations which they've done, the speed, how far they've decelerated, how many impacts they've had. It takes all that stuff, and then someone live will be looking at all this, and you can gather information about whether a player's fatigued or whatever. So that all happens already. What this essentially is that, but in the face. So you get an absolute on detail from the face, so impact on the head. So in rugby, for example, you can measure how many G's of impact that player has had. So at the moment, it's all very research. It's not used. We don't actually apply it. So all we're doing at this stage, and you mentioned Salford Red Devils, we're doing it, and a lot of other rugby clubs have kind of bought into it. It's one study done by Leeds Beckett University, which I'm part of. So it's gathering data at the moment. So it's looking to see, what we're trying to do is look at if a player has 15 impacts of this much kind of G's of velocity, is that linked to them being concussed? And if it is it linked to the severity of the concussion? That's kind of what we're trying to do. So the idea but at the moment it's nowhere near this because it's all just research. But the idea would be that in a game you can see. So if someone takes a head knock, you can have a look at their metrics and see, well, they've actually had this much percent of impacts this game as opposed to normal, and that just helps you make a decision.
It just seemed like that's incredible. Like, obviously there's probably a load of research going into football at the moment, but and there's probably people screaming at the screen. There
is. I mean, I know. So that these so the doctor, a guy called Vincent Gutterbaj, who's the FIFA, I'm going to say chief medical officer, although I might be wrong, but he's a big name in FIFA, and a lot of the sports, the heads medics of all these sports, so football, the FA, so the FA head, RFU, RFL, etc. They all meet with like researchers and scientists and etc. from the NFL and the NRL and everything to talk about concussion. They do try and like work together. And football have invested loads of money, so they're looking at what FIFA are looking at is a test that you can do on the pitch to kind of tell you whether someone's concussed or not. So, concussion, the problem is with concussion is it's, for those of you, I mean, it's used as a term, but just to define what it is, it's essentially, so if your brain gets shaken through kind of force and it affects the functionality of your brain, but temporarily, that's essentially a concussion. It's different to getting like brain damage. So if let's say you're in a motorbike crash and your helmet smashes and you kind of go unconscious and there's bleeding in your brain, that's not a concussion, that's a brain injury. And they're very different. So the problem is that when you're, like we just described, when you're on the field and someone's taking a knee to the head or whatever, you don't know, is there bleeding in this person's brain, or is their brain taking a shake and they've got concussion, which is kind of confusion, memory loss, sickness, and all the whole host of other symptoms you can get, which then recover usually. So you don't know all that. So you can't test for it. There's no immediate test. You just ask them questions. So it's not like, if you're having a heart attack, you do a blood test or an ECG and a heart tracing and you can see it. You can't see concussion. So what they're trying to do, and FIFA and football are trying to do a lot of investing a lot into this, is they're trying to see, is there a test that you can do kind of on the field? And what they're looking at the moment, the latest thing again, and we were doing it in Leeds Rhinos, but I know it's happening in other sports, is a saliva test. Yeah. So there's if there's damage to the brain or excessive force to the brain, they release like a protein into the bloodstream, and you can test it by swab. So these are things that are being looked at, but at the moment, the technology, it takes like a few days to get the results of this swab. Yeah. So clearly it hasn't got use, but if you can have one that gives you an instant test, an instant result, a bit like the lateral flow testing now with COVID, that gives you like 30 seconds, you get a result. It tells you there then if there's been, significant damage, then that'd be amazing. But at the moment, it's all research.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Sorry, it's fascinating. I could go all day asking about.
So could I. But I know we don't take too much of your time. I just want to follow up from that. Obviously, dementia, and there's dementia is going to be my next question. We've had quite a few sort of ex-English legends that have really suffered from dementia. Gordon McQueen's the latest one as well. Just want to know what's the link between concussion and dementia, and was it just as simple as they were using a heavier ball 50, 60 years ago and they're just having the effects of it now? And I know the FA are trying to put stuff in so kids don't train and heading's taken out of it. But I mean, I think we've all played the game. Heading's obviously a huge part of it. Does that, what's the research looking like that? Does it make a difference that you don't head it as a youngster and then suddenly you turn 18 and you're heading the ball, but you're still going to be heading the ball for another 20 years? What's the trade-off?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think the first thing to say is that all the research and all the understanding of concussion is like in development and is nowhere near where it needs to be. We're way behind on understanding really what concussion is, what causes it, what contributes, how you can limit it, how you can manage it. We're learning, and we're kind of right at the start of that journey. So that's the kind of just the starting bat of any kind of answer, I think. But if you look at a host of sports. So you put boxing on one end, and you put, ballet on the other side. There's a massive difference in the amount of head injuries and, post-retirement concussion or dementia or brain-related problems. So clearly, if you get repeated blows to the head and they're bigger, then it's going to cause a problem. And knowing what the level is, we don't know. What we do know is that children's brains are growing and developing, their skulls are developing and everything else. So, protecting their brain at that time of development, and not just development by growth, development by intellect and maturity, which happens as you obviously throughout teenagehood, etc., is really important. So I definitely understand why that's been done, and I support it really to try to protect kids. So there's an argument about protecting kids children in a vulnerable time in their life. When you're an adult and your brain's then developed, etc., then there's still risk that's there. And that's why, certain sports have tried to put different rules in place. Again, in rugby league, they removed the scrum, to try to help with neck injuries and stuff like that. So sports can try and help. But at the end of the day, like you say, heading is part of the game. And it's, unless they remove heading from the game, which I can't imagine is ever going to happen, it's always going to be a risk.
No, absolutely. So just to get it right in my head, so once someone turns sort of 18, 19, is that when the sort of skull stops growing and the brain stops growing, or is there? I'm just trying to think of, if they do put something in place, and they have got stuff in place, but they really go aggressive with it and sort of push it to 18, 19. What's the sort of cut off? At what point do you think it's okay? Will it ever be okay to head a ball? But at what point is it safer to head a ball than not?
It's different for everybody, isn't it? So everyone matures at different rates. So it depends on that person. So no, not that when you turn 18, you don't suddenly don't stop growing. Do you know what I mean? Like, as in, I didn't bloom until I was like about 19. I was short then. And then I just went up. So we all mature at different rates. So yeah, I think it's unrealistic to expect once you turn 18, you're kind of that you're not growing. I mean, some of us, I'm looking at you, Ty, but some of us never grow up. Do you know what I
mean? Yeah, you know me too well. I'm just gonna sort of move on to this season, and we've obviously move on to. I mean, it's a subject we can I think talk for hours on. Just gonna move on to sort of injuries, and it seems to be there's been a lot more injuries this season than there have had in previous seasons. Now, all I've had to go on is stuff you get from Sky Sports and social media, and the reason why there are so many injuries is because it's reduced rest time. You've got games that are on the back of each other. You're playing twice a week, and there's no break. Shortened season, all that sort of stuff. We're obviously Liverpool fans. We've suffered more than most, but we're not the only club. There have been a lot of other clubs. Leicester have suffered as well. So I just want sort of explain to everyone why it's important, and why number one, why have there been so many injuries, and B, why the importance of rest. You hear a lot of managers talking about we're not having enough rest, we don't have enough rest days in between. Just sort of explain that to us.
Yeah, I mean, it's not rocket science. You're playing all the time at high level. You need to recover, and you don't have a chance to recover, and you play again. It's inevitable you're going to get injuries, and the environment again isn't the same as what it was. So, a lot of things have changed. So, in terms of training, how it's done, doesn't flow the same. So they don't, there's so much more rigid now to how to put training sessions on and being tested and creating kind of COVID secure training grounds, and that does impact on the flow. So. We at one point we were asked to wipe down the rugby ball every time someone was touching it, and it's like you can't they get a passing sport where you're holding the ball, so it's difficult. So there's a lot of that going on. But yeah, I mean, the time for recovery has been reduced, and it's just like anything. A lot of people. So I work in the NHS, and over lockdown, when everyone was on about getting active and going for walks, and everyone just suddenly, you'd see everyone running on a bike.
Yeah.
My workload went through the roof of people getting injuries because they went from very little to a lot in a very short space of time, and then they just got injured. So in a similar way, you've got players who are their training has changed over COVID, so they're not quite at the place where they would have been physically and definitely mentally. And then you've got really busy kind of match schedules, so no time in between. So it's inevitably going to get injuries. And a lot of the injuries, are predictable injuries. So, you like the soft tissue stuff, muscle tears, things like that. Things like your ACLs, that injury. I know you've had some unlucky work with that. They're generally just unlucky injuries to get, and there is you can strengthen parts of your body to try to prevent them and things, but it's there's the freak accidents that happen in sport and just unlucky. But the soft tissue stuff, quads, thigh strains, hamstrings, calf, all that side of it it's just predictable that these things happen. So yeah, recovery is like in terms of things for recovery, it's things like sleep and hydration, eating well, and kind of the stuff that we all know. But in professional sport, it's done to a degree. It's done to a kind of a specific point, and it's very prescribed. And at the end of the day, it's their jobs. It's their jobs to recover after a game. So it's not like you got to have a game of like Sunday league and then you got to go to work on a Monday. They've got prescribed time to recover. They've got people whose jobs it is to help them recover. But you can't beat the human body, and the human body does need some time to be able to recover and repair itself.
Yeah, thanks for that, Marwan. Do you want to ask a question or anything, Chris? I've got one more after that, if you want to.
No, I was just thinking about all these your average Joe down the pub who says they get paid to do all this, they get paid to play all the time. I used to play Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So basically, what we're trying to say is you've got to listen to the likes of Jurgen Klopp, the likes of Pep Guardiola when they're saying they're doing too much. We're basically overworking them, running them into the ground, and basically that's why you're getting nowhere in major championships and stuff like that, because we don't have any kind of breaks throughout the English Premier League season.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, go on, Marwan.
I was going to say, Jurgen Klopp and Pep Guardiola are kind of fantastic managers. At the end of the day, they've got so much experience. And if you've got really big, trustworthy, experienced managers complaining, then people got to listen to them. And I think, you could argue that it's a level playing field in the Premier League because everyone's in the same position. Everyone's got fixtures. Although, again, it depends, because if you've got a fixture and it's cancelled because a club's got COVID, you suddenly have more rest. So although it's sort of a level playing field, it sometimes is a bit with COVID and outbreaks and what happens, it can completely mess around with the scheduling, which makes it difficult. But yeah, you compare it, then you then put it to Europe, and then it becomes, going into European competition makes it much more difficult to compete at that level.
Brilliant. I think it's going to be one more question. This was one we'd obviously thought of, me and Chris, before we turned up, and it's about COVID. Obviously, we're in the middle of a pandemic. There's players that have had COVID and then they've come back, and some players haven't recovered fully yet. And Kai Havertz one springs to mind. Salah's had it, who took him a while to get going and back on it. Just sort of experience, you've had any experience with any of the players at Leeds Rhinos, or and why having COVID then affects them returning back to elite sport?
Yeah. So obviously, as we know, COVID is a disease that primarily affects the lungs. So you get inflammation of the lungs, and if you get a particularly bad infection of the lungs, they can, even though the infection finishes, the inflammation can remain for months afterwards. So that's clearly going to have an impact on your breathing, which is going to have an impact on your fitness. So some of the experience that I've had at Leeds is increased fatigue. It comes across as they're not as fit. They feel less fit. It takes them longer to recover. So that's from a fitness point of view. But there's other bits, in terms of headache and low mood, Lots of things that now we're kind of understanding and learning about, that is this term called long COVID. And it's not just, and this is probably the important message to kind of get across, is that this is not just about, the over 65 people who've got loads and loads of other health problems and are really unwell people. This is affecting young people. And I think what's going to be interesting, and this is probably a bit more political, but is clearly at the moment, the vaccination program is fantastic. And the elderly, they're kind of working obviously the oldest age group first, and then working their way down to younger age groups. And they're dealing with the people who've got most underlying health conditions and then least. But there'll become a point where you'll have, let's say, the over 50s who are all vaccinated, and people with underlying health conditions are vaccinated. But then there's a young group who are still not yet vaccinated. And there'll be a point where I suspect they'll start opening up. And we've already got the roadmap, Boris's roadmap. So there'll be a point where we'll start opening things up again. And it'll actually be the younger people who then be vulnerable, because they won't have had the vaccine, and they probably won't have had COVID, but everyone else will be. But then everyone will start integrating. So that's, and the thing is in sport is that at the moment the professional players are not special in any way, shape, or form when it comes to being vaccinated. You can't access the vaccine privately, so they're going to have to wait in line like everybody else. And clearly they're going to be low down the priority list. So there's probably potentially more risk for sports people, because they're having to go to, again, in football and rugby, you come into close contact with people. Whereas if you've got a job that you're working from home mainly, and you got rather than going to the office, you're at home on your laptop, then you got a lot less risk. You might go to Sainsbury's or Morrison's or whatever and other shops. That's your kind of risk. Or you might go see your family. But if you're going to a stadium, you go and see other players, you're playing matches where you're rubbing shoulder to shoulder. It's a lot increased risk. So yeah, there are worries about that, and it is very real. So yeah, there's a kind of a message for anyone who thinks that you kind of, if you're young, fit, and healthy, that you're immune to this. Then I've seen firsthand that that's just not the case, and I'm grateful, to not have had it. Touch wood. But and if you do get it, then it seems like a bit of a luck of the draw whether you get it and you're unwell with it, or you get it and you're fine. But I wouldn't want to take the chance.
Thanks, Marwan. I think that almost wraps it up for us. Really, really, I mean, it's obviously first time we've had a guest on, but we're glad we've had you, because I've learned a lot from it as well. I think a lot of stuff that we just sort of read, and you sort of take it on board, and you take it as gospel, don't you? When you see it and you think, because it's on the book. I think sometimes it's good to just get a real understanding of what's going on behind. I
could listen to him all day.
I know.
I've got question after question. I've got pain in my neck at the moment.
God.
I know a good physio.
Do you know, Chris? You can ask Marwan. My WhatsApp messages to him are always, by the way, I've just pulled this. What do I do?
Right.
He's like, yeah, just stop eating shit and go for a run.
It's been great having you on.
It's been really good. Thanks for having me. It's been I've watched your podcasts and I enjoy listening to you guys. Chew the fat. But it's good to be part of it.
Brilliant!
I enjoyed it.
Yeah. So for all our viewers, guys, thank you for listening. As always, if this is the sort of stuff you like, just give us a sort of like, a subscribe down at the bottom. The question, what we do is we've started asking a question as we leave. So the question for this week is, which club do you think has suffered the worst through injuries in COVID? I mean, that could be anything. It could be if you've had the most injuries. It could be if your players, you had your star players being off injured for COVID. I mean, I think Chelsea have been quite unlucky with Havertz. They've obviously spent 80 million on him when he's played about 2 games. Liverpool, the injuries are the injuries.
Leicester as well.
Leicester have been covered quite a bit. So there's quite a few clubs, not just the sort of top few. So yeah, just let us know down at the bottom in the comment section who you think's had the worst injuries. But until next time, that's all from us. Thanks for watching, guys.
Cheers, guys.